Hey everybody, David Amado here, music director of the Atlantic Classical Orchestra, and thanks for joining me and Bridget Kibbey for a talk in advance of our final Masterworks concert of the season. I can't believe it. Bridget, thank you for joining me for this, and thank you for joining us for this wonderful week of music.
Thank you, Maestro Amado, for having me, and to your wonderful orchestra for taking this piece on and being open to this exploration of Carnival on stage.
Yeah, and it's sort of well-timed, right?
It is, exactly. We're a little
I mean,
late. Let's keep the good times rolling, or I guess post-Easter.
Right. We were supposed to be doing this, like 2 years ago?
At least, I think 2
Yeah.
years ago, exactly.
And then something got in the way, I don't know, there's some pandemic or something.
Block that out.
That did everything. But I don't know, Bridget, do you want to talk a little bit about how this came about and yeah, sort of your relationship with João, the composer, and I could talk about my relationship with too, but I think I think everyone would love to hear kind of how this came about on your end.
Wonderful. João and I have been friends for years, and I find the best collaboration comes out of that friendship. We happen to be on the same young artist roster, Concert Artists Guild, back in the day, and went salsa dancing with the Brazil guitar duo, of which João was a part, and had so much fun. He said we should work together and try reading together. He's also a talented guitarist as well as being a composer. And so we sat down and played some Jacob de Bandolim, some chorinhos, which is a really fun Brazilian kind of song style from the mid 20th century, and just hit it off. And I found myself loving the groove of working with him in that duo capacity. And João, of course, comes from this great Brazilian guitar tradition. And I grew up listening to the Assad brothers. I'm a big fan of the guitar duo genre. And so I had already been transcribing some Spanish works, piano works on the harp that kind of made the harp feel like a big guitar. And so when João and I sat down to first play in duo, we felt this simpatico feelings. And then I started commissioning him for little things, little chamber music pieces. I was touring with a trio. He wrote for percussion, clarinet, and harp, did such an amazing job. That when the opportunity came around to commission a new concerto, he was first on my mind, because I really feel like the harp's capacity in these dance forms is unlimited and has a lot of potential. And so it just really made a lot of sense for us to work more closely on a piece that showcases where he's from, his points of inspiration being these different songs and dance forms in Brazil, and then putting them onto the harp, which is, in a sense, is kind of like its own guitar duo, like two guitars stacked together.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, one of the things that I find striking, at least from a sort of conventional notion and conventional ideas of what people think of when they think about the harp, is that it's not, people don't think of it immediately primarily as an instrument driven by rhythm. And so that's one of the things that I find so compelling about this piece, is that it's so fundamentally based on these Brazilian rhythms.
Yes.
And to have the harp, which, I think if you just stop somebody on the street and said, what does the harp do? We all know what they'd say, and it's not this. And that to me is really interesting. And I think the way that, because this piece is for solo harp, strings and percussion, right? There are no winds. And the way that João also chooses to use the strings is also, I think, very interesting, because the harp, like the piano and like the guitar, has zero ability to sustain. You just can't, right? Once the moment of contact is over, it can resonate, but there's no sustaining. And so the strings are there as a kind of an acoustical tool, in a way, to kind of help identify and profile some of these ideas that would otherwise, sort of evaporate into the ether. And so I think it's a really interesting set of ideas. The percussion match with harp, I feel like that's a first cousin relationship. But with the strings, I feel like there's really it adds literally this other dimension that allows the harp to be even more harp-like, in a way. It gives the harp an extra, like a superpower,
Maestro Amado, I am so excited to do this piece with you, just hearing you articulate that so wonderfully. You're totally right. I think the strings kind of create this resonator box and a haze in moments, or kind of fights the harp and counterpoint in others, but it's never overbearing of the harp, which is really something composers have to think about in terms of what's the literal function of these different colors and why.
Right.
And I think João is so wonderful at being intentional about the use of percussion, the use of the strings as kind of like a cushion and interjector, the entire violin section being a soloist alongside the harp and duo. But he's always really cognizant of the very specific intentional role of that color to allow the harp to cut through, which his rhythms demand and ask for. But also to be supported with an undercurrent of that kind of resonator box and the strings behind it.
I think, because he's a guitarist, I think that the way a guitar functions musically, I don't think is that different. I mean, I think so much guitar music is also so kind of like so rooted in ideas of color. And I think that harp is the ultimate color box. And I feel like that, I mean, it's kind of true, right?
I feel the same way. I feel like it has just limitless color potential.
And I love the harp.
Yay.
And it's, the harpists, whenever I we have harpists in the orchestra, and it's always more harp, because it's just I mean, it adds, when a composer knows what they're doing in an orchestral setting, it adds immeasurably much when it's there. You play music of Tchaikovsky or Ravel, whoa, I mean, or Strauss, I mean, or Shostakovich, I mean, it really, I remember, when computers were first becoming a thing, and you could set your colors on your monitor, so you could have 4 shades of gray, have hundreds of colors, or you could have millions of colors, like suddenly when the harp plays, it's suddenly millions of colors, so that's great. And João, I've worked with João as a guitarist.
Yes.
We did this album together with Brazil Guitar Duo.
Heard it's wonderful.
Yes, great music, and they play great, and they're great guys. And Douglas now is with the LA Guitar Quartet.
That's correct. And they're still playing in duo, João and Douglas, but yes, he's got this other facet to his career now.
Which is fantastic. I mean, I did an album with them as well.
Oh my gosh, you are a fan of the plucked strings. I'm loving this.
So yeah, so that's that was really a lot of fun. And we actually did the LA Guitar Quartet album was a premiere recording of a concerto written for them by Sergio Assad.
Oh,
So,
wonderful.
Assad connection.
Incredible.
Yeah, so, and then João came and played with the Delaware Symphony as a member of the orchestra when we did Mahler 7, which has that very beautiful, very atmospheric guitar part in the penultimate movement.
Nice.
So, we've had a lovely and varied career together. So, but this is the first time I'll be working with him as a composer.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So this is it promises to be a lot of fun, and I think quite different than a lot of the stuff we've done in the past. I mean, it is like, I guess in some ways, like so much classical concert music, it takes its cues from kind of less formal genres.
Yes.
And that's not new, right? I mean, the obvious ones that come to mind are like Dvorak's Slavonic dances, or any of the Bach suites that use gavottes and jigs. I mean, that was all had the same sensibility. But do you want to talk a little bit about the particular kinds of music that João mined for this concerto?
Yes, absolutely. And I just have to say, regarding João in general, what I love about him as a composer is that he really epitomizes this wonderful blend of high art meets folk art, like you mentioned. He understands and knows deeply well the entire canon of Western classical music. So he understands all, the Debussy orchestral sketches to his understanding of Baroque and counterpoint is really powerful. When we were talking about the concepts for this piece and what really drives both of us, we both love Baroque and Brazilian traditional music, but this piece is not going to be explicitly sounding like that. So he's using these elements, I would say, fugue, counterpoint, as well as sounds of carnival as a point of departure. More specifically in Recife, Brazil, which is the northeastern city. It's the poorest region of Brazil. It's the driest, most arid, even though it's on the sea, you go in a little bit, it's a very desert-like region, but they have the best carnival. It's the most non-commercial. It contains, or they showcase some of the most virtuosic dancing because the rhythms of Recife's carnival are the most complex. And this piece will delve into two of those. So the first movement, called Cortejo, is actually maracatu. And that sound is basically drum corps. And you're going to hear that. And then the harps over top. So you're going to hear this interplay like a big kind of stand-up bandstand jazz band, alliterating maracatu, which is going to be so fierce with strings, harp, percussion. The second movement is called Mar Calmo, which is basically showcasing the sea. And I love bass guitar. And so I turn into a bass guitarist with a funky groove on top. And I get to really sing soulfully in my right hand on the harp, which really is going to be so much fun with the strings acting almost like, you imagine the strings that are backing up Ella Fitzgerald, right? This old school kind of crooner, swooner style. And that's what he's tapping into in that. And then the last movement, Acrobatico, is really acrobatic because it's based on the dance form of frevo. And if you were to Google frevo, you would see amazing children dancing with umbrellas and doing the most fabulous feet work. And it's a really fast 5/8. So basically the orchestra and I will be under your masterful conducting, which is so critical in this piece. We'll be kind of interjecting back and forth and playing with, you've got like these engineering blocks of five beats, but on top of those blocks, there's other lines that are kind of connecting. So that's going to be really fun to just hear all of that. And the last thing I'll say in this long-winded rant is that João's harmonic language is very unique. It's not necessarily what you would imagine in Brazilian popular music. You will hear some of those harmonic sounds coming out, but it's definitely has some esoteric harmonies in it. He's not afraid to push the boundaries in terms of the harmony and the chords that he uses within this rhythmic framework.
Yeah. I mean, there are two things that come to mind. First about the harmony. I feel like, having done these two albums with first Los Angeles Guitar Quartet and then Brazil Guitar Duo, with some relatively new music, one of the things that I learned is that built into the way the guitar is made are a set of dissonances that aren't looked at as kind of intrusions on an otherwise kind of clean tonal world, right? Mm-hmm. So even in the sort of famous sort of like romantic harp concertos, that it's filled with dissonances that I think come as the result of the physical act of playing the guitar and the way the guitar is tuned, and they give that a kind of a particular flavor to the way guitar music sounds. So I feel like some of that harmonic language maybe comes from that. I don't know, just yes. From the guitariness of dissonance of guitariness.
I love that.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you is, I felt, again, going back to these albums, which had a lot of like this concerto, a lot of music inspired by folk music. A lot of these rhythms, a lot of Brazilian rhythms, probably a lot of other rhythms too, but I'm thinking about Brazilian rhythms in particular, don't lend themselves particularly well to Western notation. That we have this kind of very organized system that chops things up in particular ways that I think unless you are, as a composer, unless you are willing to go down a very, very deep rabbit hole and write music that is what I think you and I might call over-notated. Music notation is basically just a kind of loose guide for what you're supposed to be doing. And I think it's important to remember that, by the way, as an aside, even when playing Bach, and Mozart, and Beethoven, it's still just a guide. It's not some kind of, if all you did was say, I'm going to do this as literally as possible, you'd end up with something pretty awful. But I feel like with some of these rhythms in particular, these Brazilian rhythms, they really fall outside the capabilities of Western notation. And I wonder if you have any advice or help for me and for us in capturing the way those rhythms work, because sometimes they're loose jointed in places where Western notation doesn't allow them to be loose jointed.
I think the main thing is to get that maracatu and frevo rhythm in the ear, because I have found also with the notation, it can get in the way. You almost want to feel like you're looking at a magic eye. Where have those gone, by the way? I haven't seen magic eye in years. You're like looking at this matrix of all these very complicated like blocks, right? And then at a certain moment, you're like, oh, there's the image. It's similar to looking at, does that make sense? The magic eye, everyone remember those? Okay, I grew up with those, right? You're like, there's a dinosaur coming at me. Wow, it's one of those situations, but it's also similar in that you have, all these building blocks on the page, but they're little slices, right? And if you're like going along in real time and following what's on the page, you get stuck. But if you kind of are like, you have distance from it. That's been the biggest learning curve for me, is trusting that groove and staying consistent in that groove. I work with a lot of percussionists, which has been really helpful for me. I have like a framework behind me, and it's going to be my job to be steady in this piece and for you to lead us in that too. Then we're able to kind of just raise up 20,000 feet and watch this train go by. That's the groove. And then sit in that. That's going to be, I think it's the most satisfying element of this piece, which is really why it's collaborative. It's not just like harp soloist with orchestra. It really is, we're going to be a big jam band in the end, because we're going to be making those composite rhythms together that when they are all in the right place and we're feeling cozy, then that's when the magic happens. So it's so exciting to hear you get it. You hear this, his repertoire, this repertoire. I think it's going to be so fun to explore that and get there.
I think it will be fun too. And what's such a luxury is that we get to do it 4 times.
Such a gift.
Which is, really is a gift, because things change over the course of performances. And I think it's something that I've particularly loved about my time with the Atlantic Classical Orchestra, is that ability to kind of not have the growth process necessarily stop after the first performance.
Yes.
So that's going to be wonderful. We have 2 other pieces on the program where, we're starting with this lovely work of Wagner, the Siegfried Idyll, which I think is for me, like such a refreshing side of a guy who is such a profound jerk. This is a piece, and it's really one of the only pieces of his that I do, because this is it's a lovely, personal, intimate piece. It's not what we think of when we think of Wagner. And then Beethoven's 5th Symphony. I'm sorry, there's no harp. Maybe we should write a harp part for Beethoven 5.
I can scat it if you need me to.
But I think this concerto of João's is something very special, and I think that it's a rare opportunity for us to kind of be in at the ground floor for something like this.
Yes.
And to have someone like you join us, with all that you bring, your incredible talent and your experience, and I think having the harp pulled out to the the front of the stage is also just a delightful treat for everybody. To normally the harp is not out front. You're talking about fancy footwork with the kids with the umbrellas.
Speaking of which,
so that's going to be great. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining me this morning. I'm really looking forward to working together.
Thank you, Maestro Amado and the ACO for helping to commission this piece. This is huge. You know, the only reason this piece came into fruition is because we had 4 orchestras that said, we believe in this concept. We believe in putting this into the world. So I'm glad that the ACO was on the later end of the premieres because it's been seasoned in my hands. And now we get to come in and give it, you know, a proper 4 performances together. I can't wait to work with you and the ACO and to meet all of you very soon.
Likewise, Bridget. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Okay. Bye.